Francis, good morning to you. Thanks so much for joining us. Where do you start if you're building a home? What's one of the first things you need to think about when you're looking ahead to window treatments?
Oh, good afternoon, Sophie, and thanks again for having me on the show. Look, the main thing you need to consider when actually starting out building your home is not leaving it too late. I think that's one of the key things that happens is people think about their window treatments a couple of weeks before they're going to move in. And really it's something you need to consider at floor plan stage so that you're covering everything off, like inbuilt pelmets, motorisation, even if you're having curtains, for example, that you've got enough wall on either side of the window to actually get the fabric off the glass when you want to actually let the light in. So there's lots of things to think about well before you even start building.
Francis, do you know, I love that we're having this segment because I deal with exactly this issue with my clients, and it's not just about them not thinking about it from a logistic point of view of installing them.
Yes.
It's also about budget as well, with people not thinking about what they're spending on, and then what are they going to do, stick sheets up on the window when they move in?
Yeah, that's right. I think they forget about it, James, altogether. It's sort of an afterthought.
So when you take into consideration this, can I talk about what do you think about light? I mean, we all love light in the home. How do you talk to your clients and give advice about light when you're actually covering the windows but still want light?
Look, sheer curtains and screen blinds are a great way to manage light, as you know, James.
Yep.
But also and that's managing privacy as well. So instead of having a block-out blind that's going to, of course, give you privacy, but it's going to block out the light, there are fabulous options that allow you to still have privacy but let the light come in. But lights also then, on the flip side, when you want to go sleeping, when you want to have a really good night's sleep, people can be really sensitive to light bleed. So that's the side of the blind where the light's actually coming in all around the edges. And I think people forget about light bleed and how sensitive someone might be to actually having light in their bedroom, in which case blinds might not be the option for them. They need to look at an alternative treatment.
Yeah, so just to explain that a little bit further, people don't think about this when they get a blind or something to block the light out, but then like the heavy street light outside, it's how the curtain or blind is fitted into the window cavity, if you like, isn't it, that still lets the light come in around it. It still shines through and can keep people awake.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I've got clients, I'll go to their homes and, they've got tape down the side of their blinds, which aesthetically is not the best idea, exactly, because they're so sensitive to light bleed. So in that instance, I really suggest curtains. They're making a great renaissance, which I think is fabulous because they're great for many different reasons. But for someone that is really sensitive to light and really needs a block-out, completely dark room, then a curtain, encapsulates that glass and the window completely and wraps right around it so that you are mitigating that light bleed altogether.
Now, I imagine climate and orientation have a bit of an impact too, don't they? I mean, window treatments can really affect the internal temperature of your home, can't they?
They can, but I think there is a misconception around just how much heat is lost or gained through a blind, in terms of it's not necessarily going to block the sun in summer. I have found that people feel that if they've got a block-out blind, they're actually blocking the heat coming into their home, and that's not actually true. Once the heat hits the glass, that heat transfer is then coming into your home, and a blind is not really going to reduce it. A block-out blind will block the sun, so it's protecting your furniture, it's keeping it dark, it's stopping the glare, but it's not necessarily going to stop the heat from the sun coming into your home, and conversely, the loss of heat in winter. So that really needs to be dealt with from an external perspective. It's not necessarily going to be dealt with from a blind perspective.
I'm wondering now if you can just sort of explain where you think, of course, I'd like to know about budget-wise, the difference between shutters, which we know is a beautiful, like a plantation shutter, a curtain, and then a blind. Is it a price point difference that you think people choose one over the other?
I think when someone's on a very tight budget, blinds are a cost-effective way to, have a window treatment that is able to manage light and privacy and those sorts of things. So blinds are definitely probably the most cost-effective method. Curtains use a lot of fabric, so even though they are going to be very energy efficient and really help you retain heat in a room in winter and block out the heat in summer because they cover the glazing completely, because of so much fabrics that's used in that treatment, they can get quite expensive. Obviously, it depends on just how expensive the fabric is. And plantation shutters, are also up there when you're comparing them with blinds. I suppose the other point on plantation shutters, James, is they also take up space within the room more often than not, and that's something that people forget about too, that it may look amazing from the street, but it does take space within their actual inside space too.
Now, is it a good idea to take a risk with some patterned fabric on a curtain, or should you play it safe and keep it plain?
Look, in Australia, we generally play it safe. In Europe, they go a bit crazy with their patterns, and they love incorporating lots of colour in their curtains. And you can certainly get that fabric here. But in Australia, we tend to use our curtains as another soft furnishing within the room. It dresses the space, it dresses the window, and it looks lovely. And we generally go for a plain fabric. It adds texture to the room, and then we can add other layers within that space with our sofas, with our scatter cushions, with our rugs. So generally speaking, it's plain fabrics, and then other colours and textures and prints are actually incorporated with less expensive items within the space.
Now, what about people who have, sometimes you get a new home, you move in, and then the windows, there've been a renovation or something's happened over time, and the windows don't line up around the room, and people will still want a unified look. How do you deal with that?
More often than not, I'm actually a big fan of top fixing. So that's actually using a curtain that's actually adhered to the ceiling rather than across the window frame itself. And that means that you're then able to have one line, because obviously the ceiling is the same throughout the space. And then you've got one line, and that's lining everything up within that room. If you're following the line of the windows, then obviously it's going to go up and down. So I do prefer a curtain in that instance, where you can create one line within the space.
And we just looked at an image then, we've got some overlay images that you provided, but there's one interesting shot with a beautiful set of French doors in the centre and two windows, one on either side. Now, the windows have a blind that's inside the reveal, but the curtains hang on a rail above it. So how do you feel about mixing different materials? In that case, they look like they're made from the same fabric. How do you deal with different finishes or materials in the same room or throughout the house?
Look, I think it's good to create some sort of consistency, particularly around colours and the type of treatment that you're having within a space. Having said that, though, it's quite common to have a sheer curtain, particularly facing, for example, the street. So you've got that beautiful overlay from the street, that beautiful aesthetic, and then you might have, to manage the sun and to able to have a block out, that you've got either a curtain that blocks out the light, or you've got a blind. So there's not really a problem having, for example, a blind mixed with a sheer curtain, or conversely, a Roman blind, and then you've got another treatment behind that, so that you've got the mix of sheer and block out.
Now, can we move into motorised curtains and blinds now? It strikes me as something that might be a little bit unnecessary and just an extra thing that can go wrong, but why do people go for that option?
Look, I think nowadays motorisation and home motorisation is just becoming more and more common. We've got so much in our homes now that's being automated, and motorised blinds and curtains is certainly one of those things. And I always say provision for it, even though you think you may not want it. Sometimes there's also regulations that means you can't have the chain just hanging loose. You need to have it to a fixed point. And because in Australia we have such big window spans these days, and they're getting bigger and bigger, floor to ceiling glass, big wide spans of glass, you've got nowhere to actually adhere your chain. So from a regulatory perspective, sometimes you don't have a choice, but aesthetically it looks much nicer to not have dangly chains. Such a beautiful luxury to be able to push a button when you're lying in bed, and then your blinds just open and you can see the view, or the curtains open. So they have great warranties, so they're not necessarily going to break down all the time. They can be easily fixed, but really the trend is moving towards more and more towards motorisation.
Yeah.
It does add a little bit to the cost. Yeah.
I also think,
James.
Francis, no, you're right, sorry I cut you off. I also think, Francis, that sometimes there's a need for it, so when people have got like big windows above a stairwell or above a void where you can't actually access to open and close the curtain or blind. So they're
so I was just thinking of the James Bond scenario.
Oh, do you? You want it all to be glamorous and high end.